Before we start at all, as a matter of protocol here in Futa, I'd like to first introduce the Vice Chancellor. She will bring her welcome address and opening address, and then we'll kick off immediately after that. The Vice Chancellor of the Federal University of Technology is Professor A.T. Oladiji. She's our Vice Chancellor here, and as soon as she brings the welcome address, and she will declare the event open, and then we'll continue from there. Thank you.
Okay, so do I have the floor, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good afternoon, and let me say all protocols duly observed. I recognize all the participants and the organizers and distinguished scholars, eminent guests, and participants that are present here this afternoon. I must say that it is with great pleasure that I like to welcome you to this very significant workshop on digital humanities, jointly organized by the Institute of Technology Enhanced Learning and Digital Humanities here in Futa, the Federal University of Technology, Akure, and the University of Kansas in the USA. This collaboration marks a pivotal moment in our pursuit of academic excellence, interdisciplinary research, and technological advancements in the humanities. Digital humanities research presupposes the possibility of incorporating digital technologies into humanities-based research. The field of digital humanities is an evolving one from its evolution as an academic and research activity in the Western universities and institutions such as the Kansas State University, Princeton University, and Boston University in the global north. Digital humanities has continuously expanded its scope, and considering that digital humanities research is emerging in Africa and in West Africa, specifically Nigeria, I'm delighted that Futa Inted is one of the institutions at the forefront of digital humanities research in Nigeria. This is not surprising because we are the topmost university of technology in Nigeria, and this is a position we have held on to for over 2 decades. Previously known as humanities computing, the field of digital humanities has a robust and varied history, and the divergent views on the history of digital humanities agree on its interdisciplinary nature. Hence, a major significance of digital humanities-related research is that it has connections with several other disciplines in the universe of knowledge. Indeed, digital humanity combines humanities scholarship with digital tools and methodologies to explore and analyze cultural artifacts, historical data, and other forms of human expressions. Lately, digital humanities does not only encompass a diverse range of practices, it is also believed to play a significant role in advancing research, preserving cultural heritage, and fostering interdisciplinary collaboration in the academia. Another significance of digital humanities research is that by utilizing digital innovations, such as research-based digital technologies like AI, RStudio Package, Python, Sketch Engine, Wordsmith, etc., scholars and researchers can now optimize their scholarship and drive productivity growth, showcasing the profound influence of technology on traditional domains in the humanities. It goes without saying that critical thinking and creativity have remained the hallmark of research in the humanities. Thus, the emergence of digital humanities seeks to further underscore the inventiveness of humanities-based research, vis-a-vis why it should be taken seriously by relevant stakeholders. Distinguished colleagues, for us at the Federal University of Technology, Akure, the goal is to keep up with global best practices, as well as ensure that robustness and contemporariness in research are not compromised. This is why, even as a University of Technology, FUTA is committed to strengthening its digital humanities research unit. One of the ways to demonstrate our commitment is through the organization of workshops of this nature. The present one is an introductory course. Other programs which seek to consolidate digital humanities research in FUTA will be rolled out from time to time. And our vision is to outgrow the present stage to become one of the most renowned digital humanities research hubs in Nigeria and indeed in Africa. I must not fail to note that FUTA's commitment to high academic standards over the years has continued to yield positive results. FUTA has not only continued to rank among the best universities in Nigeria, it has been the best university of technology in Nigeria for over 2 decades, with globally renowned scholars. It has also consistently produced graduates who can competently and confidently compete with their contemporaries globally. We are not resting on our oars. We believe that the journey is still very far. Our vision is to be a world-class university of technology and center of excellence in training, research, and service delivery. Before I end this address, I would like to specifically appreciate the African Digital Humanities Unit at the Kansas University in the USA. As I have already noted, the University of Kansas has played major roles in extending the frontiers of digital humanities research in Africa. We thank the institution for the present collaboration with us and look forward to future ones. I also extend my profound gratitude to our esteemed resource persons, organizers, and partners who have worked tirelessly to make this event a reality. I specifically and specially recognize and acknowledge and thank the contributions of the present director of INTED, Mrs. Fola Adebayo. Your dedication and commitment to knowledge expansion are truly commendable. And on this note, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I declare this workshop open. I wish you all a fruitful workshop. We await the outcome of this research, and I believe that by the time we leave this workshop, we'll be better informed. We will also have some actionable points, how we can move forward and proceed with this initiative. Thank you all, and God bless.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Professor Oladeji, the Vice Chancellor of the best University of Technology in Sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, before we start the session, I'll just quickly say a few words to welcome our participants. I want to welcome you to this virtual workshop on digital humanities, jointly organized by the Institute of Technology Enhanced Learning and Digital Humanities, the Federal University of Tech, Akure, and the Kansas State University, USA. This collaboration marks a major event in our pursuit of interdisciplinary research, collaboration, and technological advancements in the humanities and other relevant fields of endeavor. Digital humanities is an interdisciplinary domain and transformative field that merges computational technologies with inquiry in the humanities. Central to the discipline of digital humanities is the application of digital tools, computational methods, and data-driven research to traditional disciplines in the humanities, such as literature, history, philosophy, linguistics, media, and the arts. It allows scholars to digitize archives, employ big data analytics, and use artificial intelligence to explore patterns and connections that were previously unachievable and unimaginable. Therefore, the field has become very relevant in today's academic landscape as the humanities are evolving and not fading, and digital tools have become essential in analyzing, preserving, and interpreting human culture, history, and society. In line with this development and advancement in knowledge, this workshop proves to be very essential and timely in providing a unique platform for our scholars, researchers, and students in the humanities to explore how digital tools can enhance their research, teaching, and knowledge expansion. Here in FUTA, we are committed to maintaining our position as the best university of technology in Nigeria and in fostering an innovative and research-driven environment. Indeed, our partnership with colleagues at the Kansas State University is a testament to our shared vision of harnessing digital technologies to expand the frontiers of research in the humanities. This initiative aligns with our strategic goal of integrating technological solutions across disciplines, thereby equipping our scholars and students with the necessary skills to remain competitive in the global academic community. I am Titi Fola Adebara, Professor of Communication and Language Arts and Director, Institute of Technology Enhanced Learning and Digital Humanities, FUTA. I'll be moderating this event, and I will now establish the ground rules for our online engagement. I will start with an introduction of our speakers. First on the team is James Yékú. James Yékú is an Associate Professor of African and African American Studies at the Kansas State University, University of Kansas. He specializes in African literary and cultural studies and digital humanities research. He's the author of Cultural Citizenship, Social Media, Popular Culture and Performance in Nigeria, and forthcoming Algorithmic Age of Personality. Along with Brian, Yékú spearheads African digital humanities initiatives at the university and co-organizes the annual African Digital Humanities Symposium. Brian Rosenblum is a digital humanities librarian and the co-editor and the co-director of the Institute for Digital Research in the Humanities at the university. He works with faculty, students, librarians, and technologists to support digital humanities initiatives for teaching and research. His other professional interests include open access, scholarly communication, and electronic publishing. He has contributed to dozens of digital projects, including community-oriented projects in the USA and Mexico. Bemma Adwetewa-Badu. She received a PhD in English from Cornell University and teaches at the English Department, Washington University in St. Louis, as an assistant professor of Black diasporic literature and African literatures in English. Her work has been founded by multiple grants and fellowships, including a Ford Foundation Dissertation Fellowship, a Cornell University Digital Humanities Summer Graduate Fellowship, and a year-long Digital Humanities grant from the African Poetry Book Fund. Adebara earned her PhD in the Cognitive Systems Program at the University of Linguistics, University of British Columbia, where she was a member of the Deep Learning and Natural Language Processing Group, a former University of British Columbia Public Scholar, and currently an associate member of the African Languages Technology Initiative in Nigeria. Her work develops deep learning technologies for African languages as she remains engaged in work to make computers usable in African languages. Now, Yékú will start with an introduction to digital humanities with African perspectives. Brian will come next, and he will also speak along the same line, followed by Bemma. She will talk on exploring data visualization and digital mapping, and if they will round up with machine learning, AI, and African languages. Each of the panelists will speak for 25 minutes, and after that, we'll take on the question and answer session. That will come at the end of all the presentations. Now, to ask questions or make comments, participants will need to indicate so digitally. So, Yékú, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Adebara. I hope I got that right. Great. I am excited to be speaking alongside my colleagues at the University of Kansas, Brian Rosenblum, my colleague, Dr. Adwetewa-Badu and Dr. Adebara, both from St. Louis and University of British Columbia. It's always a thrilling excitement for us to be in conversation with our colleagues everywhere. And we're excited to sharing our perspectives and learning from people too. The African Digital Humanities Program at the University of Kansas in the last 5 years has been broadly interested in questions around digital technologies and African humanities. And I get the privilege to start and speak to some of those, and then Brian will come later to wrap up, just talking more from an institutional perspective and the work we do at KU, the University of Kansas. I'll share my screen just to have some more structured ideas to facilitate. Just a minute, please. Can people see my screen? Okay, there's one I want. Can people see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So again, I'm here to, in the next 20 minutes, just talk about an African perspective to DH. A number of key DH scholars over the years have emphasized how the field is essentially an accumulation of different fields, with scholars who do computing technologies, such as the kind of work people do at Field Footer, investigating how that kind of work can be in engagement with the kind of more traditional humanities questions our colleagues in the Department of English, in the Department of History, Anthropology, and Philosophy ask, right? So we're thinking about how scholars in all of these different fields interact with one another. This definition by a former president of the MLA in the US is one that I find really important. Fitzpatrick defines digital humanities as a nexus of fields where scholars use computing technologies to investigate the kinds of questions that are traditional to the humanities. And then she adds a second part to it, which is also how traditional kinds of humanities-oriented questions shape what those in computing technologies do. In other words, a definition of digital humanities emphasizes a bi-directional approach. And I think that's an important dialectic that shapes how both fields can create some kind of productive tension as they move each other forward. Another definition I have found useful when I think of the field is the description of DH by the scholar Melita Terras, who describes DH as not just being about the humanities, but also what it means to be human, as a matter of fact. So it's about the application of digital resources and methods to humanistic inquiry. The question of DH is one that has also become a genre in itself in terms of its definition. There are lots of materials that have been written about defining DH, right? So over time, scholars have come to see those definitions themselves as constituting a particular genre in the field. But what is often emphasized is this very creative imbrication of the humanities on the one hand, and the question of what it means to be human, questions that become really reanimated in the context of artificial intelligence. So questions of what it means to be human on the one hand, and our computing technologies, our digital methods, hardware, computer hardware and software, to be specific, shape all of those kind of questions humanities scholars often ask. Another definition I find useful for DH, if definition is important at all, is this one from a journal that started, an open source journal that started in 2007, and that's the DH Quarterly. The editors of the journal at that point defined the digital humanities as a diverse and still emerging field that encompasses the practice of humanities research in and through information technology, and the exploration of how the humanities may evolve through their engagement with technology, media, and computational methods. Again, the emphasis is on this very creative interaction between computational forms, computational artifacts, technological systems, and humanities scholarship. And for me, this is really important because it on the one hand speaks to the multiple genealogies and approaches you find in the digital humanities. So for those of us in English, for example, my background is in English African literary studies, African cultural studies. And for those in English, for those in African literary and cultural studies, for those in philosophy, for history, the idea of close reading, for example, is one major approach we find really useful. Anybody who is a historian, for example, also knows that an archival research method is also another important way of doing research. So to take those two examples, close reading, archival research, we begin to ask how computational tools, how computational methods in many ways not supplant these methods, but augment them. So the question for the literary critic would be, for example, how, say, to conduct a computational textual analysis of, say, the poem Abiku by J.P. Clark or even by Wole Soyinka, and you, on the one hand, your training in literary studies and allows you to do a close reading of this text to teach students who are interested in writing or who are interested in literature. But to bring a computational textual analysis to bear upon your interpretation is to ask what kind of new meanings and interpretations become possible when you perform what scholars in DH often refer to as distant reading. And you're drawing on the work of Franco Moretti. The point is to think about what humanities scholars will do in terms of close reading and what a DH scholar would do in terms of distant reading as strategies of interpretation that do not necessarily displace each other. So as a literary critic, what I do with the distant reading is not to push out close reading or any other humanities methods, but rather to use these computational tools to shape the kind of questions I ask when I do my close reading of text, if that makes sense. I say all of this just to emphasize how computational tools, how technological systems are being made to supplement the kind of questions we ask as humanities scholars, rather than displace those kind of methods that are really intrinsic and fundamental to what we do as human interpreters of text. Now, it is important again to emphasize the human and the humanities perspective in the digital humanities, and that's why the role of close reading, the role of human agency, and all of these remain very important. So DH scholars do computational textual analysis, as I've explained. They design databases, an organized account of structured information that could be very useful in large, say, digital editions of cultural records. DH scholars design digital archives. They do digital visualization, data visualization, network analysis, and produce critical editions of tests. I have a tool here that's called Voyant, which is a cool browser-based open source platform for computer textual analysis, if anybody wants to check it out. But just to make progress, common themes so far from what I've said, I believe, are one, the use of digital tools and methods as supplementing what scholars do in the humanities. And of course, the whole idea of interdisciplinarity. Most successful DH projects I've found out often involve a whole lot of people working in different fields of both the humanities and both the computer sciences, computer technology. So you have somebody who wants to build a digital archive and often works with somebody else who has skills in data visualization. And you have a historian working with somebody who does digital ethnography. Because again, all of these disciplines converge within the digital humanities. So the field is highly interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, if you like, also. And it involves different kinds of epistemologies. The epistemology of building, for instance, is something certain scholars have identified as key to the DH. And it's this idea that DH sometimes involves a lot of making and building of tools and platforms, right? But again, that's not all there is to DH. That's just one approach to the field. So if you're not building tools, if you're not making things, you're probably just interpreting, such that your work is a discourse-based digital humanities, interpreting digital culture forms and working with other kind of activists of digital culture. But these are common themes in DH: building, making, connecting with other people, building communities and collaboration. What we're doing at the University of Kansas in collaboration with FUTA is an example of this kind of collaboration. But there are other kinds of community-driven projects out there that have nothing to do with scholars and academics, but are relevant in this kind of conversations. Because again, DH is that open tent that allows everybody, that is inclusive of everyone, whether they are building things or not building things. And then something else that is important in DH research is the idea of accessibility, right? DH scholars are always interested in creating open source platforms to information. And for example, to digitize say an old copy of a literary text from the 1900s in Nigeria would mean thinking about how that kind of text is open to a new generation of readers on the one hand, but also on the other hand to a greater number of people than the first set of people who encountered it when it was first published. So the idea of access is really important in digital humanities, and something that is close to that is the democratization of the means of knowledge production, right? It used to be that only a few people had access to the means of producing knowledge. If you're probably at an institutional level, publishers, but with DH tools, a lot of people have the means to be able to produce knowledge. And the most obvious example of this is social media. And I'll talk about social media very soon. In terms of the themes of DH, you're talking about how DH enables the effective organization and representation of knowledge in ways that might help us to think of the humanities as an applied space of knowledge, right? It's not just theoretical issues we are invested in, but we're also interested in questions that put the humanities in technologically applicable contexts. You're using data-driven and technological-based systems to ask questions that give students new kinds of skills, and I think that's really important. Of course, there are critiques of, there are neoliberal critiques we can mount in relation to some of those, but at least the DH and the tools and the methods they afford us enable us to ask new questions, and I think that's really important. Just to make some progress because of time, in the African context of all of this, I always like to go back to histories of computers themselves. As far back as the 1960s, IBM supercomputers, and I realized IBM chose to leave the region recently. But as far back as the 1960s, the first set of IBM computers arrived in Ibadan and Nairobi. And that says to me that the histories of computers and computational work and labor is not necessarily new in the region. And I think that's something we should always emphasize. So before people started talking about the digital humanities, people were doing work along those lines, right? And that's why institutions like FUTA have always been there. FUTO, all of these technology universities that focus on computational methods, these folks have always been there. This work has always been done in some ways. But what DH does is to emphasize the interdisciplinary links and connections we can make. So this workshop is basically about emphasizing what colleagues have always done. In the 1990s, not a scholar, but at least the technologist, Dr. Tunde Adebara, was working on indigenous language technologies, developing software and hardware for computational linguistics. Nobody called what he was doing in the 90s DH, but in many ways, his work at a historical level were foundational for writing the history of DH in the Nigerian context. I mentioned these histories and this kind of work just to say that African-focused digital humanities projects center and underscore what you might call an African agency, asking African questions, using technologies and computational platforms to ask the kind of questions we ask about post-colonial African societies. And whether in the US or in Europe, in the diaspora or on the continent, you have different projects that speak to this. In the US, you have the Apartheid Heritages Project. Digital Nollywood, which I started, and then the Marichira archive in Germany. These are examples of works that are based outside of the continent. But on the continent, you have different examples of DH projects. This is a project out of South Africa, the Open Restitution Project, which basically is concerned about the digital restitution of African material culture. And it's a cool project to check out if you're interested in specifically African projects based on the continent. And I think that's really important, emphasizing that this kind of projects are based on the continent, because most of the time Africa, curiously, is sometimes imagined as despite all of the the tech startups in places like Lagos, Accra, Kigali in Rwanda, you have this lingering discourse of Africa as a space, as a place of technological lack, right? And of course we know that's not true. So you have this cool DH project based on the continent. This is another from Kenya by the African Digital Heritage Project. The African Digital Heritage Project has a portfolio of DH projects that are really important to how community partners who are not necessarily academics approach the digital humanities. And I think it's one example, this particular one I have on the screen, the Kameritho Theatre Virtual Reconstruction. The Kameritho Theatre project was one the Kenyan playwright Ngugi Thiong'o was closely aligned with. And if you know anything about the history of the Mau Mau struggle in Kenya, you probably recall how the Kameritho project is central to all of that. So what this project does is to try to look at the various spaces of performance and theater among the Kameritho people in the 60s, and see how through certain 3D models you can virtually reconstruct this. So in many ways, this is an intervention in some kind of data visualization of a theatrical tradition. And again, it's one of those kind of projects you have on a continent where different kinds of technological, computational, and in recent times, AI tools are being mobilized to reimagine the traditional questions you ask in, say, in the context of a work like this, a theater or a performance class. One other one is, again, I mentioned the Marichira archive, an archive dedicated to the work of the Zimbabwean writer Dambuzo Marichira. This is something. This work is based in Berlin at the Humboldt University, and is dedicated to the work of this important writer from Zimbabwe. Because of time, I just want to move very quickly. I mentioned Digital Nollywood earlier, which is something I started in 2018, just to think about how to do Nollywood scholarship differently, right? Again, we talked about, I mentioned the democratization of the means of knowledge production in academia and how DH intervenes in that space. When I started this project, I was thinking of Nollywood studies and how you just need to write a book, write a journal, or the traditional question or methods of knowledge dissemination in academia, and ask if it's possible to imagine Nollywood studies through a digital archive. So together with Brian and another colleague of mine, I started this project with a lot of insight from Brian, I should say, and the focus was to use what is called Omeka, and I know that there might be people who are familiar with Omeka as an open source. Can you see my screen, please?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. As an open source data management system, and the cool thing about Omeka is how it allows you have a collection, have exhibitions, and have a lighter weight approach, as it were, to the collection and presentation of data, of information, unlike the more sophisticated, heavily database driven project out there. This is really a lighter weight platform, if you ask me. And you just basically need to learn a few things about its features and plugins, and you'll be fine. But again, what is important is how you're thinking about the history of Nollywood, the history of film beyond living in bondage in 1990. To think about the posters we used to find on the wall in Lagos and other cities those days, and how those posters themselves, this material aspect of the production of Nollywood films, can help us understand the history of film in the country. Of course, we know that the history of film in Nigeria predates Nollywood, going back to the cellular tradition all the way back to the 70s and the 80s. And then the structural adjustments happened in the 80s, and then the cellular tradition collapsed with Nollywood taking its place. Excuse me, I think I have my battery running out. Anyway, I'll just wrap up. So this project is one way I envision a digital humanities approach to the history of film in the context of Nigeria. Visualizing that history also means being engaged in some kind of network analysis. And in recent times, we've done some kind of oral history. If you visit the project website, you'll find some useful materials, I hope, a number of digital exhibits on the city of Lagos and some other useful materials, I believe. Recently, I added a Yoruba component to it. So thinking about a Yoruba oral history of Nollywood veterans in the Yoruba movie industry, right? And again, the goal of all of this is just to say we can think about these questions we ask as cultural studies scholars differently, beyond just writing journal articles and doing the things we do as traditional humanities scholars. You can think about digital tools and platforms as enabling and invigorating our research approach. To wrap up, I could speak to this second project I started some years ago also, but again, I haven't had a lot of time to do it. It's a digital edition of Onitsha market literature. Again, as a literary scholar, I find DH2 really useful for the creation of, say, a readable digital edition of this pamphlets, using a static website rather than what you might call a heavily database-driven space that demands a whole lot of sophisticated tools and technological know-how. In this case, a simple theme for Jekyll, such as Ed, designed as a minimal computing space, allows the kind of things you can do in those more heavier, sophisticated platforms. So you can do commentary, you can have footnotes. And the thing with this is I can have this project in a thumb drive, take it to Lagos and continue my project there, whether there's electricity or not. So this was designed with some kind of philosophical undertones in mind, right? The idea of a minimalist approach to computing. And we can have a whole different session on minimal computing, but I wanted to mention it because I think it's important to understanding that we can do DH research from where we are using the tools we have rather than trying to do sophisticated things despite the constraints of technology and funding we have. And these are the kind of questions people ask, not just in a global South context, but even in global North spaces. That colleagues in the US would rather just use a simple platform like Wax to do a digital exhibit rather than, again, try to use something that is really, really sophisticated and sometimes unnecessary. So a minimalist computing or a minimalist approach to computing or what is called minimal computing, emphasizing what is exactly necessary for what you want to do, and then you do it, rather than buy a software to do textual analysis. Does Voyant, the web-based tool I showed earlier, would it help? Rather than reinvent the way what is out there for what you want to do. So those are kind of questions that are often asked among minimal computing scholars. And I want to wrap up finally by talking about social media and how a lot of people use social media as spaces of archival preservation, if you like. And of course, we know that beyond this rhetoric of connection, social media exists to connect communities and people. The goal for people who use social media as archival spaces for the recovery of the historical past is an understanding of social media as an architecture of knowledge. That social media offers epistemic possibilities where people can do all kinds of historical, cultural work. And of course, we know how people have used social media for activism. So in that sense, social media figures as a socio-technical space where hashtag movement like NSAS, Bring Back Our Girls, and recently the obedient movements proliferated. But for me, the goal is to think about what it means to use social media as an archival space. So when you see the Nigerian Nostalgia Project on Facebook, on Twitter, or Ugandan History on Twitter, and many of all of these other projects here and there, the focus is, again, that's what people have, right? I can't build, I don't have the technological know-how to build this tool, or I don't have the funding to do this. Why not use the space I have, which is social media? So in many ways, that is reminiscent of this minimal computing approach. But the problem with social media is everybody knows social media is not an archive, and the question of data ownership and the extractivist dimensions of platform capitalism. All of these are questions we have to ask. What happens to the photos people post online in the Nigerian Nostalgia Project? Who owns the data? And I think those are important questions from the perspective of data capitalism. And that's why, despite the minimal computing use of social media for digital, as a digital archive, the question of platform capitalism, digital colonialism, so as some scholars put it, are always prevalent when people discuss social media as an archive. Finally, for people who think, okay, I don't want to put my data on social media, you have those who think of creating alternative spaces. Like this project some years ago that was dedicated to collecting NSAS tweets and photos and narratives, basically NSAS data, and inviting people to share their experiences in the hands of the SARS unit then. And again, not using social media, but using a different space entirely. And now this is a low-key kind of project started by some guys in the community. But again, for me, it's an important space, not just because it documents police violence and brutality, but because it's one way to resist the temptation to give your data to, say, Facebook or Twitter. You're curating a space that belongs to you, where people can actually share their narratives. A similar project is the Pubbing project, the Police Brutality in Nigeria project, and it does something similar to this NSAS project to the left of my screen here on the screen. Now, the focus for me of these two projects is just to emphasize how it's always important to think about who owns the data and the kind of questions that can emerge just by asking that one question, right? Data ownership, data capitalism, and what have you. Because, and to wrap up, the digital humanities as an innovative sphere of knowledge production in the humanities does not necessarily come with the assumption that technologies are here to fix us, or that digital technologies provide any particular fixes. I don't think they do. We must continue to insist, as the scholar Joanna Drucker argues, that the human and the humanities must remain the lifeblood of culture. So again, to emphasize something I said earlier, digital humanities tools and platforms and all of these systems, whether AI or not, are not here to replace us as humans. They're here to augment and supplement what we do. And for me, I think that's the promise of DH, that the human agency of the scholar is still very much affirmed. I think I'll leave it at that so Brian can take over. I hope I've not used too much of the time we both have. Brian?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Thank you very much, Yékú. Brian, you have the floor. Brian, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, James. That was great. It's always great to hear you speak about this. Let me share my screen here. Give me a second. No, that's the wrong one. Just give me 1 minute. Okay. Is everyone able to see that?
Yes. Yes.
Great. All right. Well, yeah, thanks, James. Thank you to everyone at FUTA, to the Vice Chancellor for those great introductory comments, and to the team at FUTA for inviting me to present. I'm really honored to be able to connect with you in this way, and I hope this is just the first of more connections in the future. I am going to repeat a little bit about, or maybe reinforce some of the things James says, but I'm really going to focus on our DH Center here at the University of Kansas. I'll talk a little bit about DH centers in general, a little bit about what we are doing here at KU, both locally and some of our global initiatives. And then I have some project examples, which we probably won't have time to get to, but they're included in the slides. And if we don't have time, you can certainly go through and explore those. The slides are available here online for anyone who wants to download them, and I can share that link out later. First, let me just give you a little background about where I'm coming from. Since the title of this seminar is African Perspectives on DH, my perspective is as someone who works in the Midwest, in the very middle of the United States, at the University of Kansas. We are a public research university, a medium-sized public research university with about 28,000 students, 2,600 faculty, 370 degree programs, everything from law, medicine, business, humanities, sciences, social sciences, and so on. We are 10,000 kilometers from you all. And let me also say, I have never been to Nigeria, but I would love a invitation sometime. So I'll present a little bit about our center. It's not necessarily a model for you or for other centers, but I hope that it can kind of serve as a reference point or one example. I'm also going to just add a little bit, a couple more definitions of digital humanities, in addition to the ones James provided. And these kind of come out of my position as a librarian who works with faculty and students across the university and beyond to help build digital projects. So one of the ways of looking at it, another definition, this is by John Unsworth, who is actually the person who coined the term digital humanities back in 2000. He talks about scholarly primitives, or these kind of core methods that humanities scholars, humanities researchers have in common, and how digital tools might help perform those activities. Those range from anything from discovering, annotating, comparing, illustrating, representing, publishing, and so on. So a lot of this is a kind of practical implementation of digital tools to help do humanities research. So here's some other ways of looking at it. These kind of echo what James has already talked about. One is digital allows us to create new genres of DH, new architectures of knowledge. So these might be conveying knowledge in ways, digital collections, mapping projects, data visualizations, oral histories, things like that, and actually also digitizing materials to put it in digital form. Once it's in digital form, then you can do many things with it. Algorithmic and computational approaches. So these include things like James mentioned, the Voyant tool to analyze text, to find patterns in large collections of data. This little image here in the center is actually a graph of about 800,000 books published in English from the year 1700 to about 1925, and using algorithmic processes, the machines identify what genres of books are published. So you might have, I'm not sure exactly what these ones are, since I don't have the label there, but it's poetry, fiction, drama, and advertising, and you can see the trends in patterns over time and do things that are just impossible to do if the data wasn't there. The third area is what is listed here as socio-technical mobilization. This is really about putting tools in the hands of those who haven't traditionally had access to tools to create knowledge. So James mentioned the Omeka platform. It's very easy to use web platform. And it's free. Anyone with access to the internet can really use it, and it's been used not only by museums and institutions, but by community groups to be able to tell their own stories or create community archives or to document social movements or protests. And it kind of gives access to tools that it allows you to collect and create material that isn't typically collected by institutional archives or libraries. So let me just start by asking, what is a DH Center and what do they do? Well, there's no standard approach to DH centers. We started to see DH centers here in the US in the 1990s, really, the kind of centers that we have now today. And there was a few of them. Then there was a middle stage where in the 2010s, where universities were launching DH centers, all kinds of different models. Sometimes they were housed in libraries. Sometimes they were within academic departments. Sometimes they are just their own independent research unit. It all depends on the needs and the organization that they're part of. Our center happens to be in the libraries, but also collaborates with other units across campus, and there's some great advantages to that. Some of the functions that centers perform are providing space, project design and support, project development, offering workshops and training programs, organizing and hosting events, distributing funding, creating a network of practitioners and labs, or sometimes they have a specific research focus. For instance, the center at Stanford University, they have the Digital Literary Lab, which is very focused on the kinds of text mining and visualization of literature and other texts. Within the libraries, digital humanities is quite important, and there's different ways that it can connect to libraries. So one is digital humanities within the library, where you're providing access to humanities data and collections, developing interfaces, working with issues of intellectual property, developing platforms and tools, and essentially making library collections more accessible and available and open to analysis. Another area that libraries engage with digital humanities is through pedagogy and instruction. So visiting classrooms, leading workshops on digital humanities, providing consultations, and kind of encouraging critical thinking about technology. And a third area can be project development, server space and hosting, funding projects, grant writing, providing people and staffing to do that work. Each of those three kind of approaches requires different resources and different areas of expertise. And most centers or most libraries don't do all three of those. So as I know that you're developing DH programs at FUTA, and as I go through my talk about what we're doing here at Kansas, I encourage you to think about some of these questions. What are the needs, strengths, and challenges at your institution? What would be the role of a DH center at your institution? Who is your audience? Where would such a DH center be housed or located within the university? And what staffing and technology are available? What would you need to run the center or to meet your goals? Let's see. This, I'm looking at, my slides are a little bit corrupted here. I don't know if you can see all the images here, but IDRH, the Institute for Digital Research in the Humanities, was founded in 2010. I've been one of the co-directors since that time. It's actually a partnership between three institutions or three units at the university: the libraries, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and the Hall Center for the Humanities, our Humanities Research Center. This is how we define ourselves. The IDRH is an intellectual hub for digital humanities inquiry and practice that reaches across and beyond the KU campus. We welcome everyone from the curious to the novice to the expert. And I'm sorry, my images are not working. We have currently we have five people on our staff. They come from different units across the university, the libraries, the Hall Center, the college, and we have a graduate student assistant. So we don't really even have a space. We have five people. They work in different buildings. They report out to different people. That presents its own challenges, but it's also provides kind of fruitful channels for collaboration. Because one of the things, as James mentioned, DH, digital humanities, is all about collaboration. It spans disciplines, and there's very few digital humanities projects that like an individual can do. There's always some kind of collaboration involved, whether that's with librarians, technologists, subject experts, and so on. But here's what we see as our value to the university. We lower barriers of entry to DH for faculty and students. We promote collaboration across the university. We create space for experimentation. And we help the KU community share scholarship, develop project ideas, advance careers. We are a small unit. So we don't have enough capacity to actually build projects for people. We can provide a lot of guidance and mentoring, and a lot of people that have come through our programs have gone on to become DH scholars or careers in a related discipline. So some of the things that we do, some of the specific things, we offer workshops throughout the year. These are generally 1 or 2 hour sessions, introductory workshops to a variety of tools or platforms or methods. Here you can see just some of the topics that we've covered over the last few months. I think this is all from last, this academic year since the summer. Digital editions, AI literacy, building digital collections, a minimal computing workshop, digital mapping, and so on. These are usually, they vary from year to year, from semester to semester, based on kind of what we're hearing from folks around the university of what they want, what they are interested in. Okay, I don't know what you can see, but my slides are not displaying as they should be. It's very strange. Okay, well, apologize for that. Another thing we do is a digital humanities colloquium, which is basically inviting 4 external speakers for public talks throughout the year. And in the last 5 years, we've had about 20 speakers to model digital humanities projects. These are usually focused on digital storytelling projects, using a variety of platforms. And then those speakers also give a private workshop to our community. We have probably my favorite program that we do is our Digital Humanities Fellows program. James, is your screen showing pictures of people or just no pictures?
Just a couple of pictures here and there, but not
Okay.
working.
Okay, well, I don't know. I had prepared this immediately before this workshop. It was displaying fine. There should be pictures of 10 people there. I don't know what's going on. But our Digital Humanities Fellows program.
Ryan, do you want to reshare? Do you want to stop sharing and reshare?
Okay, let me try. No, it looks, I don't know what's happening. It looks, something happened with my file. I don't know. Okay, well, picture 10 people there. They're faculty and students from across the university. Each year we have a fellows program. We gather, people apply. It's a competitive process. We select 10 faculty members or graduate students from across the university. We try to create a diverse cohort, so there are people from different, levels, early career, distinguished professors, students, different departments, different types of projects. They come together for a year and form a cohort. We get together regularly, share feedback on our projects, take workshops, just get mutual support, do readings together and things like that. It's a great chance to go more in depth than we can in our one-off workshops. So we get to work with people for a full year. At the end of the year, there's a symposium, and they have a little poster session, and they show their projects, and that's always a great event. We also do a lot of consultations, individual consultations with students and faculty who have projects. We do classroom visits, and we sometimes have, once in a while, we have seed grant money to help fund KU folks to go to conferences or to present or to obtain software or get training. Okay, hopefully, yeah, this is messed up, but okay. So that's our center. But if we step back and look at the larger picture, there's an imbalance in digital humanities. These images are 10, 15 years old, but I think they still convey something that's happening today. So on the left, you have a map of digital humanities centers, like official digital humanities centers. And as you can see, they are in Europe and North America, US and Canada, but, is the most. At the time this map was created, it only shows 2 in Africa. One of them is at the University of Lagos, and others scattered around the world. However, there are many projects coming out of Africa, South America, Asia that maybe are not reflected in that left-hand map and don't get the attention they deserve. So my colleague Alex Hill had a project called Around DH in 80 Days to kind of highlight these projects. And every day he revealed or highlighted a new project from around the world. These are projects that maybe don't have a center to support them, which reflects another kind of discrepancy. That is, almost all the resources available to support digital humanities are located in Europe and the US. The funding, the grants, the peer-reviewed journals, the conferences, those are all heavily based in North America, Europe, and Australia. That's starting to change. There are now DH programs in South America, and elsewhere. Mexico, I know has growing work in that area. But it means that, for instance, scholars in Nigeria have much less access to the support that they might need, they reflect different needs. So one challenge is that the main digital humanities conference, the main international digital humanities conference, the ADHO, Alliance of Digital Humanities Organizations. This brings together, 1,000 people for a conference each year, kind of representing what they say is the state-of-the-art projects. And it's a great conference, and there's a lot going on, but you rarely see projects there from the global south, or Africa is very little represented there. It's partly an issue of the selection committees consist of people from US and Europe. The funding, it's very expensive. It's not held in accessible places, and so on. So this is one of the challenges of digital humanities that people are starting to address. Some of the others are representation, gender, class, and race. These are reflective of larger challenges in the academy in general. But algorithms and bias, you see this in Google search results, and of course the conversations around artificial intelligence, global DH perspectives, accessibility for users with, say, visual impairments. James mentioned this, privacy and ownership of data, and digital labor, who's doing the work. One approach that James mentioned is minimal computing, and this is basically looking at ways to do digital humanities work when you're in an environment with significant constraints. So that might be, those constraints can be, lack of hardware, lack of software, lack of education, network capacity, electricity, or other factors. And so minimal computing is about finding ways to do to develop a project using the least resources possible, or at least the resources that you have available. This is not just for places that have these constraints. In fact, there's many other advantages to doing minimal computing, not least of which is the ability to sustain projects over time. Sustainability is another major challenge with digital humanities projects. You can't, like in a library, just put a book on a shelf and, as long as the building is there and it's climate controlled, it will be there for a long time. Digital humanities projects, even when they're completed, need to be housed somewhere. Servers need to be maintained, updated. Staff need to be available to do that work. Minimal computing offers ways to reduce the effort that's needed to do that. So that's some of the things that we were working on at KU. I'm gonna now show you a few initiatives that we've been involved with that go beyond the university. And first, I'll start with the Public Digital Humanities Institute. And again, I apologize for these, where the pictures have disappeared. This was an institute, a training institute that was focused on academic community collaborations in the digital humanities. So we received a grant from the federal government to host 24 participants from around the country, representing 12 projects that were community-based digital projects, or projects that were community academic collaborations. And the teams the attendees came in teams of two from each project, one from the academic side, one from the community side. And it gave an opportunity for those teams to work together and work with other teams for 1 week and get training in digital humanities tools and methods. This was especially valuable for community members who don't have access to training or infrastructure that we do in academia. And I would say a lot of the curriculum, some of it was based on tools, but a lot of it was really about relationships and building relationships across the academic and community sectors, sort of demystifying academia for community members and vice versa. And trying to address issues of what is an ethical relationship, who gets to make the decisions, what are the goals for each side. It was a great experience, and we've just submitted another grant earlier this month to host a second institute. Another project we've been involved with, this is in Mexico. It's called Huellas Incómodas. It's which means something like uncomfortable footprints. This is a project run by students, built on the Omeka software, which documents a protest movement in the city of Toluca. There was a incident involving violence against a woman professor at the university, and there was really a lot of dissatisfaction about the way that the university handled that, and it generated protests by students and people, the general public. Within a couple days, all the signs of the protest had been erased. The graffiti had been painted over, and so on. So this was a student-run project that we helped facilitate, where students asked participants in the protest to contribute photos, to collect newspaper articles and other information, put that online in an Omeka site, and have it stand as a record of this event. It was really a grassroots kind of project, but has since been recognized by the National Archives of Mexico and is now is preserved under their digital preservation program. Another international project that we are involved in is the Urarina Digital Heritage Project. This involves making material available that the University of Kansas has collected 30 years ago from an indigenous community in Peru, in the Amazon. We hold the materials, and we're unable to really. It's very difficult to return the materials physically. There's a lot of politics and bureaucracy involved with that, but we are making them, or we're trying to make them available online back to the community. So we're working with the community to digitize, put these online, and then add allow the community to add their own descriptions and data and stories about these objects.
Brian?
Yes.
I think you have 5 minutes.
Okay, that's good. I'm almost done here. So in this case, our museum has very basic metadata about these projects. Quiver and gourd with poison darts, 30 centimeters or something like that. By putting these online and working with the community, they can translate the descriptions into the Urarina language. They can add their stories and their the meaning of those objects for themselves and share those. This is a challenging project for a couple reasons. One is that this community is very isolated and they don't have electricity. They live deep in the Amazon. You actually have to fly to Iquitos, the nearest big city, and then take a boat for three days. I haven't been there, but that's what I'm told. So it's a little strange. How can you do a digital project with a community that doesn't have electricity or access to the internet? But we are working with a couple of leaders, educators, teachers in the community who do want to use this project for two reasons. One is to be able to share this knowledge with the younger generation, because many of these objects are no longer in use due to climate change and other reasons. And we've been looking at ways to put, this is a minimal computing thing, put that collection in a minimal computing platform that can be exchanged on phones or through flash drives, and then made use of in schools, or if they are able to go to the nearest village that does have access to computers. And the other reason is to provide more visibility for the tribe to external communities, especially the Peruvian government, to advocate for more support. Finally, James mentioned this, our African Digital Humanities program. So this, James and I launched in, about 5 years ago, in the year 2000, I think. We've had, for the first 3 years, we hosted an annual symposium online, as well as occasional webinars in Dabas on digital humanities. All of those are available on our YouTube channel, so you can explore those as well. Last year, we held the conference for the first time in person at the University of Ghana last February. It attracted about, maybe 180 people, both online and in person, over 2 days. It was a great event, and we're going to be doing that. We're in the middle of planning our next one, which will be held on June 4th through 6th this year, in about three or 4 months. And I'd like to invite everyone to participate. You can travel to Accra, or you can participate online. It will be streamed as well. Here's our YouTube channel. There's about, there's probably 50 hours of material there on different projects and different themes. And then finally, a few other more recent projects that we've been involved in. One is a new initiative by my colleague Sylvia Fernandez, who used to be a postdoctoral researcher with us. She has just founded a new initiative, the Trans-Border Digital Humanities Consortium. This is a grant-funded project to really look at how digital humanities can help us rethink how we think of borderlands. So here are some examples. These are all about the U.S.-Mexican border, U.S.-Mexico border. But the larger initiative can really apply to any border. The purpose is to get us to rethink borders. Borders are used, in the media and in the general kind of environment as are seen as political barriers, areas of exclusion, which erases their often, complicated cultural history. So, for instance, the Borderlands Archives Cartography Project shows examples of where historical documents from the region that is now the U.S. border with Mexico exist. Prior to, I believe it was about 1828, prior to that, this was a region that belonged to Mexico, which extended all the way up through the western United States. And material about that history is housed in libraries on either side of the border. And when you're searching for, and it's kind of in national systems, you search for, in Mexico, you're searching for material, you're going to get the documents that are housed in Mexico. In US, you're going to get documents that are housed in the United States. But the documents at the time, the United States and Mexico didn't that border did not exist. And there's a whole cultural of colonialism and indigenous culture and settlers that exists there. And the way the political boundary is used kind of divides those up and makes those materials harder to access. And it's also an attempt to kind of change the narrative around borders. So in the US, you see the border being used as a political tool to scapegoat and divide people. Unfortunately, that is coming back even stronger than ever. The one at the bottom is called Torn Apart Separados. That is a documentation of the Trump policy from their first term of separating families of migrants at the border and trying to show the infrastructure that is supporting that. And it has many different data visualizations around the border. This one here on the screen is actually a map of immigration detention centers, which are spread all the way across the U.S. And it's showing that it's not just an issue at the border, but it extends across the whole country. That, unfortunately, is coming back. They've just signed a contract to build a new $1 billion immigration detention center just yesterday. And then the other project here is United Fronteras. It's actually a directory of digital projects. So it collects about, I think there's over 100 digital projects related to the culture and history of the Borderlands region. And it's a rich resource for studying that area. So that's the Transborder Digital Humanities Initiative. The last thing I want to mention is our new initiative here at KU Libraries, which is the Institute for Globally Engaged Librarianship. And we are looking for partners to develop connections between academic and research libraries worldwide, partnerships, research collaborations, staff exchanges, webinars, whatever that we can dream up with our international partners. It's just getting started. This website's less than 2 weeks old, but we expect to be pretty active in the next year or so. We're going to be having a partnership with the University of Ghana, and maybe FUTA as well. We can talk more about it. Finally, I have a long list of digital projects related to Africa. Some of these James mentioned. We don't have time to go into them now, but there's all types of projects here. This is the Center for Digital Humanities at the University of Lagos, and I encourage you to all explore those, and maybe in the Q&A we'll have a chance to talk more. So, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ren. We really enjoyed the session. Thank you. We hope this recording will be made available to all participants. Cool.
James, do
Hello,
you know?
Yékú. Yeah, well, James. Well, Brian, I hope we'll have access to the recordings.
I hope
Participants.
so. Yeah, yeah. I'll check with James and we'll try to do that. And I'll also.
We'll like the recording because your presentation, James and yours were very, very insightful, and we really need to keep that, in archives. So we'll move on. Thank you very much, Brian. We'll move on and listen to Bemma. Bemma.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate today. It's been amazing hearing James and Brian speak, and it's just been, I look forward to the conversation that we'll have afterwards as well. So I also have some slides. I'll go ahead and share them. It's just to help structure my contributions for today. Great. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So today I'm going to talk about perhaps two distinct things. The first thing is that I'll give an overview of my personal engagements with the digital humanities. I'll go over some of the projects that I've been working on with folks that are affiliated with the Global Poetics Project. And I'll talk a little bit about what that is. And then in the second half of the presentation, I will talk about what it looks like when we actually build projects, when we develop things, when we're working on papers, and the sort of research that's produced. And I'll talk about that in the latter half. Great. So the Global Poetics Project, I first began to conceptualize it in 2018, but it started officially in 2019. When it first started, it was just me working on the project, and that was quite intense to try and do it by myself. But I think to echo something that James mentioned in his opening remarks, and that Brian also mentioned in his remarks as well, is that these projects work best when they are collaborative and done with other people, right? So since 2019, I can say probably over 30 different people have started to work on this project, which is amazing and wonderful, and actually allows us to move a bit faster. And these 30 different people range from librarians to undergraduate students, to grad students, to other faculty, to people who are poets who are interested in the work that we do. I want to emphasize that we work with poets specifically because the Global Poetics Project emerges because I'm a scholar of Black diasporic and African literature and culture. But what I focus on within that specifically is poetry. So I'm interested in the works of poets. I'm interested in how poets connect and engage with each other. And so over the years, we've sort of settled on this description for what the Global Poetics Project is. And it is an experimental archive. So we archive the works of poets, we archive the names and histories of poets who might be understudied. We spend a lot of time going through little magazines to find, especially understudied little magazines, to find who was publishing in there, who were the poets in there, and sort of bringing them to the digital age, putting them on the web, because often you can't do a Google search for some of these people. So we try to produce that. It's also a co-working space, and I think that's echoed by what I said a few moments earlier, that we've had over 30 different people working on it since it started in 2019 officially. And as a production studio, we're interested in sort of producing things as well. And we're interested in developing resources and tools for the study and writing of poetry and poetics. So for this presentation today, I said earlier that in the second half, I'm going to talk about one of our projects in particular, where we were working on a little magazine called Transition Magazine. And we had a whole range of people working on that. I would just like to kind of briefly give credit to a few of them that worked with me most recently. So Benga Adioba, Teresa Bain, Solvich Hicks, Seth Selks, Sarah Swans, Tuma Usri, Katie Lawson. So like a lot of people have worked on this particular project, right? So for the Global Poetics Project, here are just a few of the things we've been building over the years. So the first project was a mapping project, right? And the map-based project was meant to help us and other people identify one, where poets are located in the world, right? So we actually get their coordinates, the longitude and latitude, and we're able to put that on a map and make poets sort of searchable by their location in the world, right? A large focus of the project is African poets, but because we have people with a wide range of interests engaging with the archive, we end up having lots of different poets. So sometimes we have a sort of extensive archive of like Korean poetry. We have an extensive archive of American poetry. So kind of looking at Southeast Asia as well. But one of the large focuses is really looking at Anglophone African poetry. So you'll see those poets on the map. The second thing you see there is a network model that we tried to make. And that was the first network model that, actually I made this one. So the first network model that I tried to work on, right? And that was to help me sort of think through the different groups of poets I was interested in working with, how they might overlap, how they might connect, right? And this sort of data visualization was important to me because sometimes some of these connections only become apparent or evident when we sort of put them on a sort of screen that we can interact with and engage with, because we're working with so many poets at once, right? To kind of echo some things that were said earlier, whereas in a lot of the poetry scholarship that I initially began working on, people are working on one poet or maybe two or three poets in conversation with each other. We're actually working with dozens and dozens of poets, let's say in one project, but the project overall has like 30,000 different poets in it. And the only way for us to engage with like 30,000 different people is to kind of aggregate that information and try to see their connections with one another, when they overlapped, what little magazines they worked on, what conferences they worked on, when they might have been in conversation. And that's brought up some really great and interesting insights. Some other things that the project has also worked on has been, sorry, let me just go here, has been a digitization of Ochema magazine, which was published in Ghana in the 60s. So we completed the digitization of Ochema magazine back in 2021. Unfortunately, it's only available to those that are physically based at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, in the USA. But the goal for this was that it would be accessible to everyone everywhere. That is still the hope, that everyone can access this because it was such an important little magazine. A lot of work went into digitizing that magazine. And I think, to kind of echo some things that were said earlier, these sort of digitization projects are meant to sort of revitalize or give new life to really important physical materials that otherwise might be obscured to researchers that might not have immediate access to it, right? Another thing I wanted to point out is that we have this sort of archive we've been working on where we create biographies on different poets, and we just kind of give information on them. Very often these poets emerge from the archival work that we do, but they also come from the archival work. They're also represented on the map. They might be in the network models. It's a way for us to sort of connect all of our different projects together in this sort of database. I just want to come here for a moment because I'd like to spend perhaps most of the time today talking about the Transition Magazine project. So this project was funded by the African Poetry Book Fund and the African Poetry Digital Portal. And they basically gave us resources to hire and bring on researchers who could help us sort of do a number of things with Transition Magazine. One was to make it readable. So when you sort of look up this magazine through a library search engine, what you end up with is sort of like an image or a JPEG of the magazine. It wasn't a readable PDF. So what we really needed was a readable PDF. So we did OCR scans on that with a tool called, I believe, Abby Fine Reader, so that we could actually do text analysis on the poems and the different sorts of texts that were in Transition Magazine. So that was one step of the project. The other step of the project was, again, to sort of look at who was involved in the magazine, who was writing, particularly what sort of genres were they working in, and so on and so forth. So for the past 2 years, there's a group of us that have been working on this, and it's been great. And we had 2 central questions, right? And I'm kind of moving into the second part of my presentation, which is the part I wanted to spend more time on, which is like, what does this teach us about African poetry? Like, what does the digital humanities teach us about African poetry, right? And what do we learn from digital work in the humanities? Asking these questions was really important because for the sort of digital side of the work I just showed you a moment ago, a question that I personally received from other scholars was, this looks great, but what sort of research does it produce? What can it show us? And so we decided to kind of go into our own project, into our own databases, and start to ask very specific questions of our data, so that we could try and show people the value of digital humanities work for literary study in particular, right? So we had this sort of big question. And again, I'm coming from the perspective of a scholar in literary studies, right? So one of the things that has always really interested me is that in literary studies, especially African literary studies, the novel has really come to shape the way we think about the evolution of African literature. But I'm interested in poetry, and I'm wondering, why does poetry always take the back seat? And so the secondary question with that is, what is the place of poetry within the study of African literature, right? And so this became a sort of genre question, and we wanted to be able to utilize the digital humanities to answer this sort of genre-based question, which is just simply, why do we focus on prose more so than poetry? What is the place of poetry within the broader landscape of African literature? And it was really helpful for us to start engaging with this material with very specific questions. And we had to narrow down the questions even more, and I'll show that in a few moments. But for those that are unfamiliar with Transition Magazine, I just have a brief description of it. It was founded in 1961 in Uganda by Rajat Niaji. And he served as the magazine's longtime editor. And even afterwards, the magazine moved to other places in West Africa and eventually to the West in the US, right? It was important to us because it was a multi-located African literary magazine. And so it was a really good example for us to use to try and answer this question of what is the place of poetry, right? Perhaps something that would be good to note, I think I'll skip this for now. So one of the things, or the first step that we had to do, was sort of create this data set. And data sort of serves as the base for a lot of what we do. So we chronicled issues 1 through 50 of Transition. So we worked through 50 different issues. We did the digitization, or turned the JPEGs into PDFs, readable PDFs of 50 different magazines. And that was actually a very interesting process, because sometimes with the OCR scanner, it might look like at the letter I and think it's a T, or it might look at a U and think it's an O. So even as we're doing that sort of work, we had to go in by hand and make sure that it was accurate, right? So we spent probably a whole summer just making sure our scans were done correctly. And this, again, emphasizes why working in teams is so helpful. If it were just one person trying to make sure all the T's and I's were accurately represented, that would have taken forever. So it was very wonderful that there were a group of us dedicating like Monday through Friday just to do this, right? So we did those OCR scans of 150 different issues of Transition Magazine. The next thing we did is we cataloged in a spreadsheet every writer published in the magazine. So by hand, we looked at who wrote poetry, who wrote short stories, who wrote editorials, who even sent in letters. So every little detail was cataloged by the team that was working on this. And we used the archives published by Indiana University Press, as well as some of the materials at the Hutchinson Center at Harvard University, to kind of pull together this data set. One of the things that over the years of working on the Global Poetics Project that's become really apparent to me, and that I always emphasize when bringing on new people to work with, is that very often for the sort of scholarship we're doing in African literary studies, especially those that are trying to do DH focused work, the data sets are not available to us. They're not readily made, right? So part of the process of even doing the work, before we can even really start the work, is we actually have to build these data sets, right? And very often we have to build our own archives, which is a labor-intensive process, but it feels quite necessary for the sort of work that we're doing, because it's not there for us already. There isn't some group out there that has just made it for us. So we build it, and we try our best to make it accessible to others. So yeah, so we just put this information together, and what we ended up with is, this is just an example of what this data looked like. And so this is just 2 different lines. It was too long for the screen, so it's split into 2 different sections here. This is from issue 4. And this is just an example of the sort of information we were gathering. Things like country, region, the name of the writer, of course, the city they're from, the year they were born, the latitude and longitude of their location, the region, the city, all these different things. So you'll see that in one column there's B's, that's birth, and then there's a D for deaths, right? So we know where a person was born, and if they traveled, where they kind of ended up towards the end of their life. We look at things like genre, right? And our use of the word genre was quite large here, in the sense that we tried to take into account how the editors themselves were describing the different sections of the magazine, right? So reviews, dramas, editorials. There was even a section called compartments at one point. These terms kept changing over the course of the magazine's life. So at a certain point, when we had gathered all this information, we had to decide for ourselves, what are we going to call these things? And I'll get to that later on. You'll see that we have the title, the role. So who is this person? Are they just an author? Are they an author, a poet, a playwright, a scholar? Are they a scholar, a teacher? Like, we wanted to be very specific about who they are. Again, volume, issue, publication year. This seems like a lot of different types of information, but we wanted everything in these spreadsheets, so that when it came time to create the data visualizations and to actually analyze this, that we would have everything we need to do all sorts of different manipulations with the information, right? So one of the people that was on the board that funded this, when we first presented it, asked us quite directly, or asked me quite directly, where's the role of gender in this, right? How many women were publishing? And because of that question, I did not have an answer. So because of that question, we created that column for gender, so we could take account of gender dynamics in the magazine as well. I want to show you what the first iteration of this data looked like when we tried to make a visualization, right? So this was the first iteration of it, where we just looked at the poets, right? And so I'll describe what we're seeing here kind of quickly. So the yellow is genre in a very loose sense. We just focused on poetry, and we only included other nodes. So nodes would be the round sort of dots we see here for those that wrote poetry specifically and happened to write something else, right? All the blue nodes or dots are the writers, and then the green nodes are the countries these people come from. And what we did is we kind of say, all of these people are poets. They're coming from, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but I'll just kind of hover. You'll see where these people are coming from. So Uganda, Zimbabwe, England, Nigeria, Cameroon, Singapore, Ethiopia, Malaysia, Peru, Wales, so on and so forth, in their connection. This was not the end result we wanted. So I kind of say that to say that even as we started creating these visualizations, we realized we needed to refine our questions, right? Because when we look at this feels quite messy. It's a lot going on, and we felt it wasn't necessarily answering the question we had posed earlier, which is, what is the place of poetry within the study of African literature? So we had to go back to the drawing board a bit. And when I say we went back to the drawing board, we quite literally began to draw these out. And this was also a process that took some time. And so I think one of the things that I'd want to emphasize here is that even as we're using these digital tools, so we're using network modeling tools, you'll see in a few moments tools we're using to make bar graphs, radial maps, all these other sorts of things, we actually had to start with pen and paper to try and figure out what might these look like before we spend the time to actually make them in digital form. So what you'll see is all of us were kind of sitting around a table at one point, maybe a summer ago, trying to think, what sort of connections are we trying to make? You'll see in this one, in this top corner, we're like, okay, if there's a person and they're connected to an issue, but they're also connected to a poem, but somebody else is connected to poems, it became messy, right? And it was good that we did this on paper because we enjoyed seeing the sort of messiness of it. And we kept trying different iterations of it. We tried at one point a sort of scatter graph here. And we just kept playing around with this over and over again. And we had pages and pages of this material. And I think one of the things that was really helpful, again, thinking about collaboration, is we had some really amazing, really smart librarians at our university that came and sat with us, that they specialize in the digital humanities, helping us think through these drawings we were making. At my university, we have a center for digital humanities. We call it the Humanities Digital Workshop, where they have, I want to say, 3 full-time staff members is what I'd like to say, who also work with us on our projects. They don't build them for us, but they work on them with us if we have questions. And one of them came to also sit with us as we were working through this, asking us questions, helping us to continue to refine what this might look like. And I want to show you a sort of preliminary finalized version that we came up with at first, and it changed. So what you'll see are a few things. Is we wanted to ask ourselves, how do we represent all the data we have in a way that doesn't make it overwhelming or excessive? And please keep in mind, we were working through 50 different issues of Transition magazine. And you can just imagine the number of writers that we're working with because of that. So we're wondering, how do we share this without it being overwhelming? How do we figure out ways to think through our project and lean into new ways of showing information, right? Because these sort of visual representations of the data are only useful if we can actually read them and understand them, right? So the bar graphs were helpful in that way. And one of the research librarians at our university made this initial graph for us just to kind of show us what this might look like. And this was based on gender by publication year. So one of the things that, to answer the question that I had initially received from some of the funders of the project about gender, is we can kind of see that the project mostly, the little magazine, mostly men were being published in it. So men are represented by the red, women are represented by the blue. You'll see submissions of genre over time and things like that. And then over here, we'll see something else, and I'll kind of hop to that right now, which is we began to need to ask even more specific questions so that we don't end up with these sort of unreadable visualizations. So this here is one of the network models that one of the other people from the Humanities Digital Workshop actually made for us, to kind of show us, if we just took all of our data and tried to make a data visualization, this is what would happen. And as cool as this looked to me at the moment, it was not helpful, specifically because it was showing too much and it wasn't answering specific questions, right? And I'm so thankful to that person from the Humanities Digital Workshop, Tuma, who did this so that we could actually see that there was a problem in how we were trying to present our data. So he did an amazing job showing us that this was a problem for us. One thing I also want to note, just coming here again, is you'll see these sections in this sort of light tan, brownish color, and that's for the unknowns, right? So again, a lot of our data, a lot of the research we do, it involves us having to do these sort of deep searches for information about people. And sometimes the information we want is not available to us. So it became really important that we accurately represent when something is unknown, when we do not have information, and to represent that in the bar graph, in the data visualizations that we were making. So one of the things that we ended up having to do was to kind of go back to the drawing board and clean our data again. So we like to clean our data with an amazing open source tool called OpenRefine. It's available for download from the web, and then it just sort of lives on your computer. And what we were able to do is upload all the spreadsheets we had made and use OpenRefine to then clean that information so that it would then be in very organized tabular format or a CSV, comma separated value format. And from there, we were able to start creating much more, I'll say, specific data visualizations. So again, after noticing the issues from something like this, which is unreadable, we decided to kind of go back to the, we decided to go back to the drawing board, used OpenRefine to clean the data a bit more. We standardized titles of items such as genre. So again, if you remember from a few moments ago, I was saying that, we were kind of following the way that the editors of transition thought about genre, but that sort of made it unwieldy. So we had to really narrow it down to like nonfiction, poetry, because we're interested in poetry, drama and things of that nature. We had to fill in blank spaces, so on and so forth. So we spent some time doing that. And we ended up with about 4 distinct visualizations that I ended up developing late last summer into the fall. And so the first one you see here is genre issue analysis, right? So we had to narrow down our questions even more. And with bar charts are very interesting because they allow us to visualize individual series of things and their total, right? So what we see here is each issue 1 through 50, the different genres that are being published in the magazine. So we narrowed down the language to nonfiction, poetry, drama, and fiction. And so those are all represented by a different sort of color. The bar graph is helpful because it allows us to see the totals and allows us to see the total things that are published, but then also allows us to see the sort of specificity of what we're interested in, right? So what you might notice right off the bat is that each bar represents an issue of transition with different colors indicating specific genres. So the genres are stacked on top of each other in order to the average frequency of appearance in the data. And so what that sort of indicates for us that drama was rarely published in the magazine, followed by fiction. So drama and fiction were the lowest 2. The highest one was nonfiction, but the second highest one was poetry. And that was very interesting to us because it began to answer our question, which is, what is the place of poetry in African literature, right? So this sort of numerical way that the bar graph gives us information was quite helpful.
But you want to start wrapping up? I think.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Then I'll just sort of get to the last one then. This is one of the ones that was really interesting to us. This was a genre place analysis, and this was a radial sort of visualization where it shows nested information. And one of the things I'll just do quickly to wrap up, and I'm happy to talk through other ones during Q&A. This is a map-based one. This is a network model-based one. But to sort of end, I think I will just show what this looks like when we're actually able to engage with it, which was really wonderful for us. So let me just share here. Great. Hopefully you can see this. So one of the great things about this for us is that it nests the information in each other. So for example, I can go to Kenya. It will hone in on there. I can go to nonfiction and then just kind of see that information there. So it'll just show me countries in relation to genre. I can hover over to like Ghana, for example. I can see how things were broken up there. And what this showed us was not just the number of things being published, but the number of like genres being published by specific countries, right? So this was very helpful for us to kind of get these visualizations simply to see, like, again, to answer the big question we had. And we found that, using digital tools, using data visualization tools was able to help us answer very specific questions about literary study that are sort of perhaps not as well documented or researched, that haven't been represented in this specific way before. So it was a great opportunity to kind of think through poetry, the digital humanities, and data visualization. So I'll pause there. If there are any questions, I'm happy to talk about them during the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Bemma. We really enjoyed your section. You highlighted the place of poetry in African literature through data visualization and data mapping. Thank you very much. After Ife's presentation, we'll take all the questions. Ife, you have the floor now.
If first to set up, if you just want to stay if you want to talk for about 20, 25 minutes, you'll see my hand up when it's time.
Okay.
Sorry, I'll be distracting you, but sorry.
All right. Good. I believe it's good evening. Yes. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I don't know where everyone is watching from. Thanks for having me. I'll be talking about machine learning, AI, and African languages. In this presentation, can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. In this presentation, I'll try to talk about my research and what I've been doing. I'll talk about the problem I've been trying to address, the motivation for solving this problem, solutions I've come up with, challenges along the way, and the contributions I've made so far. In that process, I would also talk about future work. So my work has basically focused on developing natural language technologies for African languages. And if we have seen the way the technological trend has gone, we see that natural language processing technologies have changed how we work. So for example, we're able to translate from one language into another in real time. We can get our document summaries. We can have our own chatbot and our own personal assistant, and so many other technologies out there. However, unfortunately, the sad reality is that many people cannot benefit from these advancements simply because of the languages they speak. So most of these technologies are domiciled in languages such as English, French, and a couple of high resource languages. In Africa, for example, we find that we have more than 2,000 languages that have been reported there. And that is about a third of the planet's languages. And according to Bloomberg, 95% of those have yet to be connected with the global market through voice and speech and text technology. And this means that many speakers of indigenous African languages do not have access to common technologies in their indigenous languages. So that means if you do not speak English, French, or any of those high resource languages, you can't use those technologies. So if you look at the map on the screen, you can see Africa highlighted in red, and you see, the dense concentration of multiple indigenous languages. And we can also see how sparsely populated a couple of other areas in the world is. So when we do not have technologies for African languages, we do not have technologies for at least a third of all the languages that are spoken in the world. And this is what leads to my motivation. So what this means is that about 1 billion African people, which is about 17% of the world's population, are excluded from global conversations in their indigenous languages. And this has implications on the overrepresentation and the underrepresentation of certain groups. And languages are used to train models. And this also amplifies existing biases and social inequalities. So for example, we understand that when you do not have the opportunity to communicate, your voices are not heard, your perspectives are not heard, your unique stories and cultures are not heard, right? So we have a smaller pool of information that people are drawing conclusions from, rather than from, a larger population of people that are able to communicate. Apart from this one problem, there's also the problem of missing diversity of grammatical features in NLP data. So for example, when we think about African languages, we think about tones. At least 80% of African languages are tone languages. We think about serial verb constructions. We think about vowel harmony and several interesting typologies that occur in human language that is not visible in other languages. So for example, if you see the first map, this map on my screen, where I've highlighted Africa, you can see instances of concatenative morphology domiciled in Africa and absent almost everywhere else, such that if you do not have data from African languages, you most likely are missing out on that specific feature that is very dominant in African languages. Also, in this other map, you can see examples of plural marking across different languages. And you see the green part, the orange part. In fact, the orange part is almost, not seen anywhere else in the world, apart from a very small speck somewhere. And once we do not have these kinds of languages represented in models that are being built for natural language processing, what we're actually doing is we're not building for a variety of linguistic features that exist in different languages. And so this brings me to my solution, which is to, develop technologies for African people in their African languages. And my work centers on ensuring that the needs of African communities and African societies are being, are actually provided for by the technology. We're not just building technology just for the sake of building, but ensuring that the real needs of African people are catered to through the technology that is built for them. And this will enable Africans, for example, to be able to read news automatically translated into their language from a different language, access medical information online, retrieve information, product reviews, in the languages that they speak and feel most comfortable with. Now, this is a very, laudable idea. It's very interesting, and everyone thinks, yeah, that's a very good idea, but it comes with a lot of challenges. So the first challenge is that most African languages are low resource, in the sense that we do not have digitized, enough digitized text and speech for African languages. So if you look at my screen, there's a table there, and you see a class category between 0 and 5. And we see 5 is where we have English, Spanish, German, Japanese, and French, which is just 7 languages in the world that fall into category 5 languages. And they have 2.5 billion speakers, and they just 0.28% of all the languages that are spoken in the world out of about 7,000 languages that have been reported. But most of African languages are between category 0 and 1, which is left behind languages where it's probably impossible to develop digital technologies for them, or digital resources for them, rather. And this is because, there's the culture of documenting languages is very low in Africa. Most indigenous languages are either not orthographed, and even when they are orthographed, they are barely used on the web. And so this is a major challenge when it comes to developing any kind of AI technologies for African languages, because a lot of these technologies are very data hungry. They use billions and billions of text or speech, depending on what kind of AI model you're trying to build. And this is a major challenge when it comes to developing technology for African languages. So if you see on my screen, there's a map also that shows how much resources is available across the world. And you will find that from that map, you see, when you look at Africa on the map, where I've tried to highlight it, you see there's a sparsity of data. The red is for areas where there's a huge amount of data. So the darker the shade of red, the more data available. And anything yellow, anything green, anything orange are like the lower resourced. And anything gray and white is showing you either there is no data available at all, or we have like less than 1,000 documents available in those languages. And so this is a major challenge. Apart from this, the second challenge that really occurs is that when data is not available for these languages, a lot of the data is poor quality data, in the sense that it's probably not well documented. It's not well archived. It's not well labeled. So for example, you can have a language that is archived, but doesn't have the appropriate language code or doesn't have the right language name, and this is a major problem. So there's a paper that was written by Akure. They manually audited the quality of about 205 language corpora, and then they found that more than 50% of sentences in some of the data sets was actually not acceptable quality. So when you have that kind of data being used to build anything, it's going to affect the utility of the model that is built with that kind of data set. And so this is the second major challenge when it comes to developing technology for African languages. And this issue is really complicated by the language policy that exists in Africa. So if you notice, we're all, a lot of us have, a lot of insight into Africa because we're working on Africa in one way or the other. What we find is that the language policy favors the use of foreign languages for official business. And what that means is that when you have a foreign language as the official language in any place, for example, it means that most documentation is going to occur in the official language and not in the indigenous language. And so the opportunity to have more data in those indigenous languages has been, affected by the language policy. So for example, in Nigeria, we have about 512 Nigerian languages, but only 3 Nigerian languages are used on a regional basis. And this project, this event is actually taking place in Nigeria. And you can agree with me that even though we have those 3 regional languages, the official language still remains English, and most documentation occurs in English. In Ghana, for example, they have 73 languages, 10 languages are used for any official work. Tanzania uses only Swahili out of 118 other indigenous languages. Kenya uses 12 out of 61. South Africa uses 12 out of 21. And so when you do not have official status for an indigenous language, definitely the amount of archived data or information about that language is going to be very small. So these are the major challenges that needs to be solved. And those were challenges that I encountered while doing my work and continue to do this type of work. And so I'm going to walk you through some of the contributions I've made so far, despite those challenges. And the first one is a project which is called Afro-LID, which is a neural language identification tool for African languages. So this work was published in EMNLP in 2022 and was awarded by UNESCO as one of the global top 100 AI solutions in the world. So the goal of this work, the key contributions here is that first, Afro-LID is a publicly available tool that is useful for appropriate language identification. Remember, I mentioned previously that one of the major challenges is that even when you do have data, the data is not, might not have been archived properly, might not have the right language codes. And so proper labeling of data, proper recognition of data is the first step in developing any kind of AI technology for any kind of language. So what Afro-LID does is that it's a tool that is able to automatically identify 517 African languages and language varieties so that you can develop technology based off of properly labeled data. And this tool is publicly available. And then Afro-LID actually supports the highest number of African languages in any tool that you find publicly. And it outperforms all other publicly available LID tools that cover any number of languages in Africa. And when I say any number of languages, some of them cover 5 languages to maybe 80 languages. And so when comparing each of the languages that are supported by those tools with Afro-LID, Afro-LID significantly outperforms them. I also performed some error analysis to find, the areas that need improvement in the tool. And then I also evaluate Afro-LID in the wild. So to get data for Afro-LID, I ensured that the data that was used for Afro-LID is typologically diverse. So it includes 5 different orthographic scripts. So Ethiopic script, Arabic script, Vai script, Coptic, and of course, Latin script. It has 5 out of 7 word orders, So word orders in terms of like subject, verb, object order, subject, object, verb, verb, subject, object, verb, object, subject, and no dominant word order languages. Also, the data is taken from linguistically diverse families. So we have Afro-Asiatic languages, Nilo-Saharan, Niger-Congo, Creoles, Khoikwadi languages, Austronesian, and the whole idea is the more diverse your data, the more the data is able to generalize, to new examples that it hasn't seen. So AfroLite is built with a very diverse set of data across 517 languages, taken from 50 countries in Africa. And so this is how AfroLID works. It's available online. Like I said, it's publicly available. So you have a text bar where you put in your text and you are able to use that as a test. And then you activate AfroLID with the blue detect button at the bottom. And then it's able to tell you the ISO code of the language, the language name, the script the language is written in, as well as a score that tells you how confident the system is in terms of that specific language. And what this does is that knowing the quality of your data, knowing the name of your data, of the language in which your data is written, is an important first step. You can't skip that step if you're going to build any kind of technology for African languages. And so the model does very high accuracy and F1 score. I don't want to go into too many details because I don't know. I think we have a very diverse group listening. So the model achieves very high F1 score and accuracy, and that's the distribution of the capacity and the performance of the model across different languages. And so we see some languages doing very well and some not doing very well, but the vast majority of them are doing between 90% to 100 in F1 score and accuracy. And then I do some analysis to just see the performance of the model in different scenarios. The first one is to check the performance in terms of scripts. Remember, I mentioned that we have like 5 different scripts. We find that languages that are written in unique scripts are doing, have better performance than those that are written in non-unique scripts. So for example, we get up to F1 scores of up to 100 for some languages. Also geographic proximity, which has to do with how languages across, geographically close areas, share lexical items and how that impacts the model's performance. So in this scenario, we're looking at instances where there's code mixing or code switching, diglossia, and all kinds of, linguistic issues that occur when several languages are spoken together. I also do evaluation of creoles, which are like pidgins. So different types of creoles in Africa. The data has about 9 different creoles. See the performance and finding how well the model does in handling creoles. And like I said, AfroLID is available online. You can use the you can get access to the online demo and the GitHub that has the tool and as a Python library by using the QR code on my screen. I'll walk you through a second project. I think that's the only one I'll be able to, the only 2 I'll be able to go through. And the second one is Serengeti, which is a massively multilingual language model for Africa. And this is a suite of like 3 different language models, large language models that supports 517 languages of Africa, as well as 10 of the most spoken languages globally. And the key contributions here are first, Serengeti, which is a state-of-the-art for 517 African languages, outperforming existing models out there and supporting the highest number of African languages so far. Also, there's a benchmark that is used to evaluate the quality and the capacity of those models. AfroNLU is what it's called. And then I benchmark Serengeti on AfroNLU to show the capability of the model. Then I also do some linguistically motivated analysis of model performance. So like I said, Serengeti is also publicly available on the web. This is what the interface looks like if you go try to get access to it on Hugging Face where it's saved. You can put in your language in there, and this is for a language completion task where it just sees a few words and it can fill out whatever word it is that you want to use. There's several tasks that Serengeti works with, which I'll discuss later. And then it gives you different options for a word that fits that particular, closed task or that masked area. And then it gives you the probability of that specific word occurring there. So this is what the benchmark looks like. It has named entity recognition, part of speech tagging. So Serengeti is trained to do named entity recognition, part of speech tagging, sentiment analysis, topic classification, question answering, language identification. It's able to do quite a number of different tasks, 7 tasks in all. And this is actually more than any other model that supports any African language. And so if you check my screen, you see the results. Serengeti outperforms Facebook's XLMR, which is trained on a few African languages. It also outperforms Google's MBAT. It outperforms Masakani's AfroXLMR and AfriBeta. And like I said, Serengeti is a suite of 3 different large language models. And so we have Serengeti E110, Serengeti E250, and Serengeti itself. And also, Serengeti is also built for language identification and already outperforms AfroLID, which I spoke about previously, significantly. Also, when it's used on a sentiment analysis task, it also outperforms AfroLID as well. And so this is another QR code if you want to have access to Serengeti. I think I am already at the 20 minutes mark. So I'll just so I'll just put this here. There's several other tools that are built that are also available online. There's Cheetah. Cheetah is for generative AI. There's also Token. Token is for machine translation. It can translate between 150 pairs of African languages. So all these QR codes are here, so you can, if you want to have access to any of those tools and use them, you can easily do that. Yeah, I think I will just, and then I'll go to the conclusion. And so my research really has been to develop technologies in African languages. So we have large language models, machine translation tools, language identification tools, just ensuring that Africans can have access to all the technology in the languages that they speak. And I believe this is very important in ensuring that the unique perspectives of African people is heard globally. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. Future work, I'm focusing a lot on policy, on data, as well as developing models. Like I said, policy is so important in how much data is available and even the quality of data that is available. Also building data sets that can be used to develop all kinds of, more complex tasks. As technology is moving forward, I believe that African languages should not be left behind, as well as developing the related models for them that are necessary for African people. And limitations and ethics, I will continue to emphasize the need for the responsible and ethical usage of these models for positive impacts. They should be used ethically, with ethically sourced data sets. And yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Adebara. We've enjoyed listening to you. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our interaction. I think I'll just quickly, in 2 minutes or 1 minute, summarize the discussion so far, and soon after that, we'll take answers and questions, and we'll take questions and answers. Yeah, James started the discussion with his talk on introduction to digital humanities in African, with an African perspective. He talked about digital humanities being a diverse and emerging field that engages with technologies and computers and so on. In the African context, histories of computers, he says, are not new in Nigeria. And it is took us through Africa-focused digital humanities projects in Africa, in Nigeria, and in the diaspora. He also talked about some initiatives like the African restitution cases, digital Nollywood, etc. And then he also talked about the social media as spaces of archival preservation. Quickly, I'll go on to Brian. Brian talked about what they do at KU. And then some of the things they do, he says, are workshops, global debates, digital humanities programs, and so on. And then he told us that digital humanities programs exist in the US, in Europe, parts of Europe, in Australia, and in Mexico. It's a new initiative in Mexico. And he talked about pressing issues, talked about minimal computing, and then initiatives and projects they have put in place. Under this, you have things like the Public Digital Humanities Institution, the Mexico Hulas y Comodas, I hope I pronounced that well, and then the Urania Digital Heritage Project, the African Digital Humanities Project at KU. And he also talked about the conference coming up in Ghana in June. Please, you'll give us more details about that. We're going to interact with you shortly after these interaction ends. And then he also talked about the Transborder Digital Humanities and then the Institution for Globally Engaged Librarianship. And then Bemma talked, she underscored the place of poetry in African literature through data visualization and data mapping. She took us through the whole process. And finally, Adebara talked about Adebara, thank you, talked about machine learning, AI, and African languages. And she talked about tools that have emerged from her research. You have the Lead African Language Identification, and it is Serengeti, that is massively multilingual language that handles massive multilingual language models for Africa. And she said it performs a couple of other tools. She is interested passionately too in developing technologies for African languages so that Africans can have access to technology and advancement in knowledge. Thank you very much. I just tried to summarize your contributions in a few minutes. So we'll move on very quickly to the question and answer session. People on ground here can have questions, you can indicate, but people who are online, we can do so by a show of hands. So, do we have anyone who has questions here to ask the panelists?
People could also use a Q&A chat box if they want to.
Okay, yes. There's someone here who wants to ask a question. Tell us your name and quickly ask the question.
My name is Tochukwu John Ezugo. I have two questions. One goes to Yékú. I want to know how we can evaluate the reliability and validity of digital sources and possibly their methods. The second one goes to Amma. In your work, is there a place for retaining Africanness, especially as you are trying to visualize African poetry and other African literature? Is there a place where the visualization captures the Africanness, the African culture, or does it alter it?
Should we take the questions all at once or respond?
Yeah, I think we can. I think we can to save time. We can take all the questions, at once, and then people concerned can.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
By the hand raised. Oh, hang on, there's a question. My imagining it. You do the
There's a question in the Q&A box. I can read from here for the Q&A if that's okay.
Okay.
And in fact, you can see a question, can you? If the question is for you, how does terminology development feature in your work?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So do you want me to answer that right away, or do you want me to?
I think we just get all the questions accumulated and then we can come back to them.
Okay.
Yeah, let's harvest all the questions. Yeah, there's a question there.
Okay. So thank you for the wonderful presentation. My name is Oluwani Femi. And from all the presentations, what I can pick is that there's a lot of qualitative data, involved in digital humanities research. So for humanities researchers, scholars that are already used to qualitative style of doing research, how do you think we can incorporate qualitative analysis at this stage? Quantitative, yes.
Yes. Please, you have the floor. Go ahead. Lawrence, please ask your question.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. DH is a very interesting field, and the major challenge for me, thank you to the speakers and the organizers of the event. A major challenge for me trying to conduct DH research is access to data. Data these days is monetized, highly monetized, very expensive to access. For example, I did a research on social media and flood in Nigeria. So I wanted to access data from victims of flood disasters. After paying about $150 for Twitter data, the data I had was very scanty, less than 100 data sources, which is not enough for conducting DH research. And then for me to have access to more data, I needed to pay about $10,000, $5,000, which is almost impossible. So how do scholars in this field access such kinds of data that are very valuable for conducting DH research? Maybe, methodologies or procedures that have been done before can be shared, on that very challenge. Thank you very much.
So I think we can now respond. Let's take the responses.
Okay, very briefly because of time.
Yes.
The question about digital sources and methods, for me, the way I see it is to remember that DH sources, methods, projects, as a matter of fact, are usually peer-reviewed, right? And we still need to trust that important scientific process even in this specifically digital context. And of course, I know you may not be able to trust, say, crowdsource digital sources like Wikipedia, although a lot of us use Wikipedia, right? But the truth is, many digital projects and sources out there are still considered important platforms of knowledge production. They are trustworthy. because this is a community, right? People will network, will collaborate, produce knowledge, they peer review one another's work. So I would imagine that, and this is for Tochukwu, obviously, that these sources can be trusted, right? The question of expensive data online, maybe Brian may be able to speak to that, but I do know that getting Twitter API data and all of those things used to be easier before the pre-Musk era. In recent times, things have changed radically, and for me, it underscores the need to get your hands dirty and actually do things. That's one thing I have seen with DH. If you want to rely on third party, and there are people who outsource process of data generation, right? You want to go through certain people. There are companies who can get this, say, social media data for you for social media analytics, but you can actually look for tools that do these things for you and get yourself to do them. But it would be great to hear what Brian thinks about that. That's my side of the questions. Aman and Ife and others can chime in, of course.
Yeah, thanks, James. I'll just add a little bit. I mean, yeah, it's a challenge, and there are a lot of data is under the control of commercial corporations. In fact, there is I don't remember the company, but there is one company here in the U.S. that owns most of the historical data on U.S. slavery, and you have to pay for it. So either through your library will subscribe to it, or you've got to find open sources of data. There is a movement kind of related to open access publishing called the Open Data Movement, which is trying to support and promote open data repositories. And James, if I'm going to send you a link, maybe you can post it. I think if you scroll down, there is a list of some open data repositories. But excuse me. Okay, I just sent you that link. And those have some, but of course, probably the data that our colleague here is asking about is not in there. But I encourage you to look at some of the open data initiatives there. And for reliable information about digital projects, yeah, as I think James mentioned, when you publish an article, you get a peer review process before the article is published. That doesn't really happen with digital humanities projects. So, one of the best practices for doing that kind of work is to put an about page with credits that says who is involved, what their goals are, where the data is coming from, to be as transparent as possible. So many digital projects don't have that. There's just a project with a map and some information, and you don't know where it's coming from. So if you're creating a project, try to follow those practices or look for that information on the project's webpage.
Emma?
I think to answer, it's okay if we go to some of the other questions, James?
Yes, go ahead. Go
Great.
ahead, Emma.
So I think I'll say, I think I'll just say two quick things. The question that was directed to me was about the place for retaining Africanness and African culture in the work. And one thing I will say is that everything about the transition project in particular, has to do with an African little magazine, right? So what we're looking at is how the editors of this magazine, based in a few different places, it was in Uganda, then it was in Ghana, then it was in Nigeria, right, before it came to the US in around 1990, right? It shows what these editors were thinking about when they thought of African literature and poetry. It shows us what they were sort of putting together. So I just want to say that the data we pulled together is specifically and directly from the little magazine. So in that way, I believe it retains a sort of Africanness in and of itself, because it's emerging from an African little magazine. Just one quick thing about the prior question. I'll just echo what was said earlier, that I also have to build all my own data sets as well. So it's that process of having to like be messy with the work and sort of produce it on your own is how I've done it. I've never had to like buy the data for it because it's not available to me.
Okay, thank you very much. Ife, to answer the question. Yeah. Yes, Ife, can you provide a response for the question posed?
Okay. So the first question is in terms of terminology development. So that is one of the areas that I'm interested in working in. But when it comes from the data perspective, like this type of work, it requires like a lot of like linguists coming together to decide what the terminology will be, particularly for cases where there's a concept gap or there is a word gap in the two different languages. So those are some of my interests that I have not particularly worked on right now. There's another question about how do we overcome poor data modeling in digital humanities. I think this has a lot to do with paying attention to the data. And usually it takes a lot more work to get that done, because you have to, you have to like have some fine-grained analysis of the data you're using to model. Because once the data is faulty, the model that's going to come out of it is going to be faulty. It's like, garbage in, garbage out. And so for me, when I was trying to develop these models, I had to do, manual curation approaches. I had to, really focus on checking the quality of data. And that took about 3 years of work, to gather, as much data as was required for a lot of these models that I discussed. So it's actually a lot of work that people that are probably working in other spaces or, languages from other countries might not have to, they might not have to go through that kind of process, but that's the sacrifice it takes to work on, on African data. It's usually very noisy, very unclean, and it will take some work to get, any kind of good quality out of it. Yeah, I think, then someone says, how do we certify that data gathered through third parties is reliable? And yeah, it still has to do with, you doing the due diligence of checking through your data, not just assuming that the quality is good. You need to, sometimes when I have like language data, I look through it, even if I don't speak that language, I pay attention to all the details, try to use, my linguistic background to find the issues that are existing with that data set and decide whether that's going to be good for modeling or not. So I think that's an important step, in terms of building anything. The modeling part of things, like developing the technology, is important, but the data and the cleanness of the data, to me, I think is one of the most important things in terms of ensuring that you're building good quality models. Yeah, so I think those are the questions that. Okay, someone says, how do you handle the issue of standard orthography and data quality when gathering? Yes, so the issue is for a lot of African languages, there are no standard orthographies. And so in that scenario, we'll have issues relating to, data sparsity, which also affects the quality of the model down the line. But without standard orthographies, we still have to build models based on of the non-standardized orthographies, I would say, because we have to understand the reality that is on ground, and we're actually building for people. So when you do not have standard orthography, that means people will definitely not write, in a standard way when they get to use your model. And the idea is to be able to get those models to work in the wild when people get access to it. So in such scenarios, the modeling decisions that you take will have to, show that we understand that there's no standard orthography, and that's the reality, particularly when working with African languages. And in terms of getting data quality, I previously mentioned that, it took a lot of manually looking through the data, one language at a time, looking through all the sources, ensuring that the quality was good, ensuring that, the writing was, according to what, is prevalent for that particular language, right? So those are some of the challenges, and that was a time-consuming, rigorous process. And like I said, it took at least 3 years, to gather data for this many languages. And so, yes, data work is very intensive, very difficult, very challenging, but it's something that we all have to do until we can, be very confident about the quality of data that we want to use in model. If we don't do that, the downstream tasks will be really poor.
If I could just
thank
add
you very
something,
much.
could I add something very briefly? There is a question about minimal computing in traditional humanistic inquiry in Africa. I just want to highlight, and Brian just sent a link I'll put in the chat soon for those who are interested in questions of minimal computing. One of the major philosophical foundations of minimal computing is to ask about 4 sets of questions. And one of them is, what do we have to do this work? Brian and I and other speakers have shown several DH projects. The moment you want to design your digital project, you know the questions you want to ask. You have explored some of the projects we have shown and others just to get a sense of what you want to do. The next question might be, what do you have and how can you get this particular project done? One of the things I think we could do in the African context, in the Nigerian context specifically, is to collaborate with people who already do computer work. There are lots and lots of guys in a place like Futa. You have guys in computer science, you have guys who know web designing. We can collaborate with them. They may not see the value of their work, the relevance of their work to, say, African literature or the history of Adwetewa-Badu or Akure, but we can design something with them and collaborate with them. That's the point. I always say that we have a lot of people who have solid tech skills, who understand these platforms all over the country. And of course, for them, they just want to monetize their skills as anybody would. We can collaborate with them, give them, give them a couple of nairas, and I think they'll be fine. They'll come on board your project. You can tell them what to do. That way, you're designing something usable, at least in the context of a DH project. But I'll put a link on the chat and see if people are interested in it.
So thank you very much. We await the link. But while that is going on, I'll just quickly say a word of thanks to our for the beautiful presentations we've listened to this evening. On behalf of management of our university, our colleagues in Futa, and our online participants, I appreciate our speakers for their insightful and brilliant presentation. Thank you, James. Thank you, Brian. Bemma, thank you. Adebara, thank you. Thank you all very much. We really are grateful. We will keep engaging with you all, leverage your knowledge in your area of research, and consolidate on our collaborations with you. Thank you very much. Please don't forget, we'd like to have access to the recordings. And I wish to inform you all, particularly James, that we're not in Futa, in INTED, that a someone who is interested, whose area of expertise is in machine learning, works with us. So that's a plus for us in Futa. I want to thank management, for the involvement of the young man in the things that we do. But we're trusting God for more. Thank you very much, everyone. We hope to have more webinars in the future, in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.